Hi, I'm Anna Lee, one of the pastors here at Cokesbury Church, and I want to welcome you to online worship. We're so glad to have you as a part of this worship service, and we hope that you will enjoy this time of getting into Scripture and worshiping God, and we hope that you'll share this service with others. Thanks so much for joining us. Thank you, Beth and Marcelo and all our wonderful musicians. We appreciate you all so much. And Danny, for how you all lead us in worship every week. So thank you for being here and for leading us so faithfully every week. It is good to see all of you here this morning. My name is Anna. I'm one of the pastors here at Cokesbury. And I don't always get to be up here on this side of the street, but I'm thrilled to be here today. And I want to let you know about something special that's happening next week also. Next week, Cokesbury students, the kids from our youth group, are serving on the South Campus. They're serving today on the North Campus. So this is the month where they take turns serving us as greeters and ushers and things like that. So I hope you'll come and be in support of those students. And some of you who are students, we're going to be calling on you this week for jobs. So be looking forward to that. But I'm glad to be here. I'm glad to see your faces. Mary Lou told me this morning, she was at the welcome desk. She said, well, we had so many visitors that we ran out of welcome bags. So it's great news, but I'm sorry for those of you that didn't get one. Come back again and we'll make sure to get you that gift. But I'm thrilled to see familiar faces and new faces as we are walking this journey of Lent together, this journey towards Easter, towards the empty tomb. And we do that every year because we need to tell that story of our Christian life together over and over and over again. We start telling the story with Advent and we work our way all the way through Lent and to Pentecost and through ordinary time. And we go through that same story of the Christian life every year because we need to hear those stories. We need to be reminded of who we are and who we are in Christ. So this series called Walk This Way. It's titled that because if you want to learn something about another person, it helps to walk in their shoes. It helps to see what they do and where they go and who they talk to and how they react. And that is what we've been doing with the story of Jesus in the Gospels throughout the season of Lent. We're walking the way of Jesus. We are walking to the places that Jesus went through the scriptures. We are listening to the conversations that he had. We're seeing who did he talk to, what made him happy, excited, what made him angry, what made him sad. And all of these things are helping us to be followers of Jesus. It's the way that we know how we are supposed to act. And we have heroes in our life, people that we look up to. People that we revere, people that we hold up. Anybody a superhero person? I won't get into DC versus Marvel, mostly because I don't understand the difference. So I apologize. I know there's some of you here that could probably help me with that. But somebody shout out, who's a superhero? Superman? Spider-Man? Wonder Woman, yes, my girl. Iron Man? Batman? Hulk? There's a lot coming from the choir. Couldn't hear them all, but there's good ones. Yes, Wolverine. There's so many. And what's cool about those stories is you meet them in all these different awesome action movies, or there's cartoons about these superheroes. But one thing I love is they often have an origin story, where they tell you about where that person came from or what made them the way that they are and how that impacted their life later. You go back and you walk the path of that superhero. Well, we get to do that with our ultimate hero, the ultimate person that we aspire to be, the Son of God, our Redeemer, our Savior, Jesus Christ. We get to go back into the Gospels and see who he was when he was living on this earth. What was important to him? What things do we need to take away from that? So when we get confused or when we get off track, we go back to the story of Jesus. We go back to the beginning to learn about who God is in Jesus Christ and what that means to us. Now, there are people in our lives who help bring us back to that path of Jesus. We can go to the Gospels, we can read the scriptures, but there are people in our lives who also do that for us. Heroes in our faith. People who light up the path for us. People who we can look to and say, if I'm off track, I can look to their example and they're going to lead me back to where I want to be. Now, I have many of those heroes in my life, some of whom are in this room. One of whom is Beth Berkey. She's hiding over there behind the piano. But she was my Bible study teacher for many, many years in college and shortly thereafter. And I look to people like Beth and others who are walking ahead of me on this journey, and they teach me something about what it means to follow Jesus, about what it looks like to be a follower in my everyday life, not just here. Because sometimes we come to church on Sunday and we go, oh yeah, I know exactly what I need to do. I know exactly where I need to be. And then it gets to Monday and Tuesday and Wednesday and Thursday. And we find ourselves wandering off the path sometimes. And we need people in our lives to draw us back, to light the path, to help us find the way. One of those heroes in my faith I want to tell you about today, his name is Father Charlie Strobel. Now, I'll probably call him Father Strobel as I talk about him. He would want to be called Charlie, doesn't like the kind of fancier titles. Now, Father Strobel does not know me. If he walked in here, he wouldn't recognize me, but I know him. And I have learned so much from his life and his influence. He is a Catholic priest in Nashville, and in 1986, he founded a ministry called Room in the Inn. Some of you have probably heard about Room in the Inn, but Room in the Inn now, in 2022, is a coalition of churches and places of worship around the city of Nashville from November 1st to March 31st, traditionally the coldest times of the year in Nashville. Every single night of the week in those months, folks who are experiencing homelessness, men and women in the city, come to a central point, and the churches that are volunteering that evening receive lists of guests that they're going to serve that night, and they put them on their church vans and their church buses, and they take them to their churches. They feed them dinner, they spend time with them, and then those folks have a warm, safe, dry place to sleep for the evening. In the morning, they drop them back off whatever neighborhoods they like to be in, and then the process continues the next day. Now, in addition to that, they've developed this incredible place called the Campus for Human Development. And it's this big building right downtown Nashville, right near the convention center, if you've ever been down that way. And in the Campus for Human Development, they have now long-term supportive housing, so some affordable places for people to live. But they also have, for people who are experiencing homelessness right now, they have things like art therapy. They have meals. They have music classes. They have alcohol and drug treatment programs. They have a job counselor. Y'all, they have a foot clinic. Have you ever been to a foot clinic? It is where nurses and doctors and volunteers from around the city come, and they literally care for the feet of people who are homeless in the city of Nashville. They wash their feet, they provide foot care, they give clean and warm socks. And the list goes on and on of the ways that this ministry is serving its city. Now, that all started with Father Charlie Strobel, just this regular guy who had experienced a call to ministry in his life, and he began offering a place for people who are experiencing homelessness to spend the night. Because what he was seeing was people around the city who didn't have a place to go, and he knew that his church was paying the light bill and the heat bill every single night. And yet, there were people outside who didn't have a place to go, and those two things didn't add up for him. Well, I got to meet Father Strobel and serve on his team when I was a young seminary student. And I was as green as they came, and I showed up there, and I didn't know anything about anything. And I was excited to learn, but I was trying to understand what all was going on, and so they put me to work right away, and I got to be just a small part of this incredible thing that was taking place in the city. The 9 months that I spent there were life-changing for me. I met people and learned lessons that I would carry with me for the rest of my life. And I looked to Father Strobel as this figure of what it looks like to really love our neighbors, what it really looks like to go out into our everyday life and do something about a problem that we're seeing. And I get overwhelmed sometimes. I think, how could one person do something that big? And I'll never be able to do something that important. I'll never be able to walk in those footsteps. But I want to read you some words from Father Strobel about how it all started back in the 1980s. Father Strobel said, "The people who were homeless were in the church parking lot. They were sleeping under my window, and the temperature that evening was dropping below freezing. And I didn't think too long about it, probably because I knew that I would talk myself out of it. As a pastor, I knew the consequences of such a decision were far greater than simply giving a dozen men one night's lodging. What do you do tomorrow night when they come back? And the next night, and the next night, and on and on and on. One simple decision could be parlayed into a lifetime commitment. What would the parishioners say? Or the bishop? Or the neighbors? For the moment, I decided that it was the thing to do. Like Scarlett O'Hara, I found myself saying, I'll worry about that tomorrow. So I invited them to spend the night, and they have been with me ever since." When I think about Father Strobel, I start to think about that leap that he made. Start to think about this incredible leap that he made into doing something for his neighbors. And then I start to think about somebody that we meet as we're following Jesus. You might have heard of him. He shows up in Matthew 14, 22 through 23, and some other places. You might remember his name. His name was Peter. But here's what happened when Peter was faced with a big choice. It says, immediately Jesus made the disciples get into the boat and go on ahead to the other side while he dismissed the crowds. Okay, so I'll pause right there and say, what crowds are we talking about? This happens right after Jesus feeds the 5,000, that incredible miracle where there's just a few fish and a few loaves, and he feeds everybody. So right after that is where we're picking up. So Jesus sends them in the boat to go on ahead to the other side while he dismissed the crowds. After he dismissed the crowds, he went up the mountain by himself to pray. Now, there's some of you who are in a study right now on the Lord's Prayer. That's one of our studies that we're doing during the season of Lent. And one of the things we're learning about is when and how did Jesus pray. So he sent the guys on ahead, and he went up to a place by himself to pray, as he often did. When the evening came, Jesus was there alone, but by this time, the boat, battered by the waves, was far from the land, for the wind was against them. And early in the morning, Jesus came walking toward them on the sea. But when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified, saying, "It's a ghost." And they cried out in fear. But immediately Jesus spoke to them and said, "Take heart, it's me. It is I. Do not be afraid." Peter answered him, "Lord, if it's you, command me to come to you on the water." So Jesus has already walked them across the water, and Peter says, "Okay, if it's really you, command me to come out to you on the water." So Jesus said, "Come." So Peter got out of the boat and started walking on the water and came toward Jesus. But when he noticed the strong wind, he became frightened and began to sink. He cried out, "Lord, save me." Jesus immediately reached out his hand and caught him, saying, "You have little faith. Why did you doubt?" And when they got into the boat, the wind ceased. And those in the boat worshiped Jesus, saying, "Truly, you are the Son of God." Now, when you see somebody walking across the water, understandably, they were a little worried. That was a little frightening. So think about water. I know we've got Parker, who's in the 3rd grade. Olivia, what grade are you in now? First grade. So you all know, and some of you others know, that they study liquid, solid, gas. They study these different things. What happens if you try to stand on top of water? What? You fall down. Yes, it doesn't work. You step off the end of the diving board, you can expect that you're going to sink. You're going to go straight under the water. 10 out of 10 times. That is what happens with water. But this night, they're watching in the middle of this storm. They see Jesus, and he is walking on the water. And they're like, okay, this is different. This is new. And first, they're scared. And then Jesus says, "You don't have to be scared. It's me. It's me." And Peter goes, "Okay, well, if it is you, then you tell me to come out there." So Jesus says to Peter, "Come." So he steps out in the middle of a storm onto water. And at first, he doesn't sink. I just imagine that moment. I imagine Peter locking eyes with Jesus and walking towards him for however many steps or seconds that lasted. He's locked in with Jesus. He's coming towards them. And then I think about the way that Father Charlie stepped out in the middle of the storm of homelessness in Nashville with no easy answers, with lots of people that had a lot of opinions, and he hears Jesus say, "Come," and he doesn't know what's going to happen, and he just takes a step out. 14 years ago, I went on a trip to visit the U.S.-Mexico border right outside of Tucson, Arizona. Now, that area's changed a lot even since I was there. But at the time, we were there to study the issue and the problem of immigration and all the stuff that many of you all know about from the news, but those people were experiencing it on the ground in their own town. So we went there and we met with government leaders. We heard from clergy people, from pastors. We heard from teachers and principals and social workers and factory workers, all different kinds of people who were trying to figure this out, this issue that they were having at the border. And I was so impacted by what I saw during that trip. My heart broke for people on both sides of the issue, on both sides of the border, who were just waking up every day trying to do the best that they could, trying to care for each other, trying to follow the law, people who had different opinions about that. And you just see all the controversy that was going on and on again. But one of the things they had us do while we were there, they took us out into the desert. They said, "We're going to go on a desert hike." I didn't know what that was. I'm from the Smoky Mountains, where it's sort of a rainforest type of atmosphere here. I wasn't very familiar with the desert. They said, hat, sunscreen, water, comfortable shoes. They told us that we were going to be going into kind of a remote area. So we take off on this hike into the desert. What we found out as we walked we were coming from the Arizona side, and it was this remote path where people who were walking through the desert, who were crossing the border without permission, would sometimes end up on this desert path. And they were teaching us, showing us what it looked like, where people walked. Because what they said, a lot of people talk about these issues. They've never been here. They don't know what it is. So we're out there walking, and we see a giant blue drum, like plastic, big, huge drum of water. And we thought, there's nothing out here. There's nothing. We're in the middle of the desert. And we say, what is that? And they said, oh, well, there were some people who started to hear that people were walking through the desert and that there were people dying of thirst on this trail in the desert. And they were a group of retired men and women, and they felt the call from Jesus to feed the hungry and give the thirsty something to drink. So when they can, they hike out here and fill up these drums full of water so that nobody would die of thirst. And they don't have an agenda other than that. They're not trying to get involved on one side or the other, but what they knew was that there were people who were thirsty and they didn't have anything to drink. And those guides looked at us in the eye and they said, we want you to think about this in a little bit of a new way. That when you try to solve this problem, when you go back home and you talk to your government leaders, I want you to think about how bad does something have to be where you think your best choice is to take you and your family and walk out into the desert with no water. And I never thought of it that way. And you think about the refugees who are choosing to get onto trains and onto buses and on foot right now, going out of the Ukraine. You think, how bad do things have to be for somebody to make that choice? And those men and women who decided that they were being called to put out water, y'all, they stepped out in the middle of a storm. They heard Jesus say, come, and they have been faced with all kinds of opposition, people that don't like what they're doing. And they said, you know what? All we're being asked to do is give water to someone who's thirsty, nothing more, nothing less. That's what we've been asked to do. We're stepping out of the boat. Jesus said to come, and that's what we're doing. I have a friend and a colleague. You may have heard of her. Her name is Rebecca Fetzer. She's sitting just over my left shoulder. A few years ago, Jesus called her to step out of the boat into some pretty choppy waters in the city of Knoxville. Many of you have heard her talk about Susanna's house, but some of you are new and don't know about Susanna's house. Susanna's house is a place for moms who are struggling with recovery needs of all various sorts and their children. And Susanna's house provides support for those moms in so many ways. We can tell you more about that on another day. But what you need to know is that the opioid crisis is a huge issue in the city of Knoxville and surrounding areas. And Rebecca and others heard an invitation from Jesus to step out of the boat and to do something about this, to help these moms who were in need, who were struggling. And I remember getting to be just on the front row watching her in that season of that first call being placed in her life, and the way that she stepped out so faithfully into what were choppy waters and what certainly some people would say, you're going to sink. You can't stand on water. But when you get in a position to lock your eyes on Jesus, you can start to do things that the world says are impossible. And it's easy to get intimidated by these stories of people who do really big things for Jesus, of people who are giving their life away, of people who are stepping out in faith. And you think, I can't do that. It's not possible. These people are heroes in the faith, and I'm just me. But I want to remind you of the part in Peter's story of what happens when he takes his eyes off Jesus. You remember it says that Peter stepped out onto the water in the midst of the wind and the waves, but he's walking toward Jesus. And do you remember when he started to sink? It was when he started to notice the wind and the waves. His gaze shifted off Jesus to the surroundings, to the circumstances, and he starts to go, whoa, 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 whoa. I don't think I'm going to be able to do this. I think this is a little crazy. And once he became afraid, once he started to focus on the obstacles, that's when he started to sink. And the scripture says what happened next is not that Peter went underwater and starts sucking, water into his mouth and he's flailing around. It says immediately Jesus reaches out his hand for Peter. Immediately. Immediately, Jesus reaches out to Peter and said, I've got you. And they get into the boat and they have a conversation about what happened. It doesn't say that Peter was just able to do this, that it was no problem. He was like, yeah, I got this. I'm going to walk on the water to Jesus. Because being a follower of Jesus does not require us to be perfect. Does not require us to always get it right. Doesn't require us to always have the answers. In fact, we are human. We know we're going to mess up. And there are some pretty big waves around us. Father Strobel, still, after all these years, is helping to lead that ministry in Nashville. He faces opposition all the time. People who say, well, I don't want that kind of person in my neighborhood. I don't want those kind of people around here that you're trying to help. Maybe we should do that somewhere else. Or he faces people that say, that can't be done. When I was working alongside Father Strobel and his team, I met so many of the homeless men and women on the streets who are veterans. Father Strobel said, it's not okay. It's not okay that we would ask someone to serve and then not take care of them. And there were people that say it can't be done. That's too big a problem. And he said it can be. If we keep our eyes on Jesus, if we keep walking forward. He made mistakes. The people who've worked alongside him have made mistakes. But they get up and they keep going. They find the path of Jesus again. And Jesus immediately reaches out a hand to catch them, to say, come back. Those folks I told you about in Arizona, the ones who just decided to start putting out water, many of them face legal charges. Were imprisoned, some of them, put in jail for, as the law said, helping someone else to break the law. It was interpreted that if you gave somebody something to drink while they were doing something that was not legal, that you were responsible too. Some of those folks went to jail for a time. And I have to imagine that they felt like they were sinking under the water, and Jesus reaches out a hand and says, I'm here. Keep following, keep walking, even when it doesn't make sense. Now, you can just ask Rebecca, has there ever been a storm? Has there ever been a day when something didn't go exactly right? I think about the days when there's a mom who relapses, or there's a person that is lost to the disease of addiction. And how devastating that is for Rebecca, for her team, for all of us that care and love the women and children of Susanna's house. And it's easy on those days to focus on the wind, to focus on the waves and say, this storm is too big. It's not possible. It feels like defeat. But Jesus reaches out a hand. Sometimes Jesus reaches out a hand through one of you. When you reach out a hand of encouragement to somebody around you, when you reach out a hand and say, I'm praying for you, I've got your back, what can I do to help? Jesus reaches out a hand and says, all you've got to do is keep your eyes on me. So if we're going to walk this way, if we're going to walk in the footsteps of Jesus, we're being called to say yes. Now, I don't know what the thing is for you. Jesus is going to call all of us out of our boat, out of our comfort and security and safety in a lot of different ways. Sometimes Jesus calls us as a church to step out of our boat. I feel like that was one of the things that happened is Jesus called us to the ministry of Fig Tree, which for those of you that are new is it's housed out of the building across the street. But Fig Tree is a ministry to people in our neighborhood who are experiencing homelessness or who have needs of various kinds. And many of you come there on a weekly basis and you volunteer. And you help people get on the list to take a shower or to get their clothes washed or to access the internet or get help with finding a job or a place to live. That's a moment where we're being asked to step outside of the boat. And it only works if we keep our eyes locked on Jesus, because there are so many people and so many things that will tell us it's not possible, this is too big a problem, this church can't solve that problem. There's nothing we can do. But Jesus says, come. When you start to walk the path of Jesus, you learn a little something about resilience. That's why Peter is a hero of our faith. Not because he did a great job. In fact, we'll hear more about Peter as we get closer to Easter. Do you remember who made a pretty big mistake? It was Peter. Peter, the night Jesus is being crucified, denied that he even knew Jesus. It's a pretty bad one. And yet, Jesus chooses to use Peter to build his church. Peter's part of the reason that we're all sitting here. And it's not because Peter was perfect. It's not because he stayed on the path every single day and he knew exactly what to do. And every day he was marching the road and never faltered once. No, Peter, like all of us who love and follow Jesus, make mistakes. But the way that we get on the path is to go back to the story of Jesus, to go back to these followers of Jesus, to go back to the heroes in our faith, to look at the people who are ahead of us on the path and say, how can I find my way back? Because when we make a mistake, Jesus is not standing there with a ledger tallying marks of things that we did wrong, Jesus is reaching out a hand immediately, saying, come home, come back, continue to follow. And that's what it looks like to walk this way. It's to be resilient, to say, I need to look for where Jesus is saying come, and I just need to keep taking step after step after step. So I want to ask you today, as we are journeying this path toward the cross, toward the empty tomb, what is your next step? In what areas of your life is Jesus asking you to take a big step? I mentioned 3 different big issues in the world that people who've inspired me have cared about. I mentioned people who are experiencing homelessness. I mentioned the opioid crisis. I mentioned issues around immigration. Those are just 3 of hundreds of things. And we're not all called to care about and to participate in every single issue. We need to know what's going on. We need to show love and compassion. But what's the thing you're being called to take a step on? At your school, at your workplace, in your neighborhood, with your family, with your friends. What is the thing that you see that is stirring your heart? And how is Jesus asking you to take a step of faith out of the boat? What is Jesus asking you to do that other people may be telling you can't be done, it's not possible? Where is Jesus calling you to take a step? That is our prayer for this morning. To say, God, what do you have for us to do? How could we serve you more faithfully? And then we ask God to continue to reach out that hand when we falter. Let's pray. God, we have no problem with the wind and the waves part. We've pretty well got that covered. We know where the wind is in our life. We can see the waves. It just takes one glance at Twitter or one look at the newspaper or one time of turning on the news to see how many things are going wrong around us. But God, we also hear your voice saying, come, it's me, don't be afraid. God, send your Spirit into this place that we would be moved to action, that we would be moved to step out of the boat, that sometimes walking in the way of Jesus looks a little bit like walking on water. And it's not because we can pull ourselves up by our own bootstraps. In fact, it's for the very reason that we can't. That we're not able to hold ourselves up on that water alone. God, allow us to meet your eyes today, to know that regardless of the obstacle in our life, that you have a plan and a purpose for us. God, we thank you and we praise you for this time, for a place just to set aside to get to talk to you and learn about you. God, we thank you for every person in this room, every family they represent. God, I pray that your Spirit would move each of us so that we would take next steps that would change the world and help to build your kingdom on this earth. First, in the name of your Son, Jesus, we are always praying. Amen.
Who am I that the Lord of all the earth would care to know my name, would care to feel my hurt? and you told me who I am. I am yours. Not because of who I am, but because of what you've done. Not because of what I've done, but because of who you are. I am a flower quickly fading, here today and gone tomorrow. A wave tossed in the ocean, just a vapor in the wind. Still you catch me when I'm falling, and you hear me when I'm calling. And you've told me who I am. I am yours. I am yours. I am yours. Whom shall I fear? Whom shall I fear? Whom shall we fear? Whom shall we fear? We are yours. We are yours.
Thank you again for joining us at Cokesbury for Worship Online. We hope that you have a wonderful week, and we look forward to seeing you again very soon.